Europe's stability hangs by a thread. The European Union, long a bastion of cooperation, is today struggling with fissures that are difficult to ignore. Political ties are fraying, governments are rethinking long-standing energy relationships, and no one is certain what the future holds. While the rest of the world observes, Europe struggles to remain afloat in the face of increasing pressure. But is it too late? What happens behind closed doors might be the spark that propels Europe into a new period of instability. Today, we're going into the fast-shifting energy world, where old rules no longer apply and relationships are put to the test in unexpected ways. Europe has long relied on energy imports, but the present crisis has shown how vulnerable that reliance is. Historically, Russia has been one of the continent's most important energy suppliers, providing more than 40% of Europe's natural gas at its height. That flow has been cut off, and nations throughout the EU are feeling the pressure. With Russia's gas deliveries to Europe plummeting, several governments are exploring all possibilities. Italy, for example, has publicly indicated that it may re-establish ties with Russia once the war in Ukraine is over. This would represent a return to past reliance, as Italy, like many other EU countries, struggles to secure regular energy sources. In 2022, Italy bought over 29 billion cubic meters of Russian gas, accounting for 38% of its total gas imports. For Italy, returning to Russian energy supply means more than simply diplomacy. It is about survival. As Europe's energy prices rise, states confront a difficult dilemma: maintain political unity or prioritize energy security. The EU's cohesiveness has been challenged like never before, and energy policy is at the center of these disagreements. While some nations advocate for a more drastic shift toward renewables, others, such as Italy and Hungary, want to re-establish connections with Russia to ensure energy supply. These opposing goals are producing breaches within the EU as countries retreat inward and become more focused on their own national interests. Actually, with each energy crisis, the split inside the EU becomes more pronounced. While Germany, France, and other nations focus on long-term initiatives to reduce fossil fuel use, Italy and others say that pressing problems must be addressed immediately. The argument over how to reconcile green energy policy with pressing supply demands is causing a slew of paradoxes, leaving the EU scrambling to keep its member states on track. As a result, as Brussels strives for togetherness, the flaws in the foundation widen. Moldova, a tiny country wedged between Romania and Ukraine, is confronting its own energy crisis. Moldova, which was formerly highly relied on Russian gas, is now vulnerable to supply disruptions and geopolitical pressure. Due to a scarcity of natural gas, industry and power plants remain idle, causing the region's frail economy to suffer. Moldova, already in transition, is facing a dilemma: switch fully to other energy sources, or seek new methods to reconnect with Russia. For a country of little over 2.5 million people, an energy scarcity is not only an economic issue, but also a security concern. Moldova's prime minister has already warned of a looming security catastrophe, as the country's already delicate political climate is exacerbated by these shortages. For Moldova, the stakes are extremely high, and with few options, the decisions ahead might completely alter the country's future. The blockage of Ukraine's gas pipelines has serious consequences for Europe's energy supplies. The nation has traditionally acted as a transit route for Russian gas into the EU. Before the conflict, over 40% of Russia's gas shipments to Europe went via Ukraine. Now, as the situation escalates, gas deliveries via Ukraine have been interrupted, leaving Europe looking for alternatives. For Europe, this is a pivotal time. The continent urgently needs to diversify its energy sources, but the challenge is enormous. While new pipelines such as Nord Stream 2 were intended to alleviate the strain of Ukrainian transit, geopolitical factors have stymied many of these projects. As it is, Europe faces a possible gas scarcity that may endure for years. For Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary, the reliance on Russian gas remains considerable. As Europe's energy situation worsens, nationalism begins to surge. Countries are increasingly making decisions in their own interests rather than following EU-wide accords. The emphasis on energy security is further accelerating this transition. Italy's recent negotiations over resuming Russian gas imports demonstrate that national governments prioritize energy security over political unity with their European counterparts. Hungary has already taken a similar route, preserving connections with Russia during the energy crisis. The government's reliance on Russian gas supplies has alienated it from much of the EU. But Hungary's priority is obvious: securing enough energy to keep the economy running. Rising nationalism threatens to destroy the cohesion that once bound the EU together. As energy becomes more scarce and expensive, political calculations shift, and member states increasingly prioritize their own interests over the common good. Across Europe, companies are facing the hard reality of energy scarcity. Germany, one of Europe's industrial powerhouses, is experiencing factory slowdowns and reduced output. Steel companies, chemical factories, and automakers are all experiencing the effects of increased energy prices and restricted supplies. In reality, Germany's industrial production has already fallen by 3.4% since 2022, owing primarily to rising energy costs. Countries such as Moldova and Ukraine are also facing extensive industrial downtime. Transnistria, a province of Moldova, has already seen enterprises close as the area runs out of gas. The energy scarcity is more than simply an inconvenience. It is a direct danger to economic stability. The EU's reliance on Russian energy has come at a high cost, and European industry is now bearing the consequences. The situation in Moldova's separatist territory of Transnistria typifies the greater issues that Europe faces. As Russian gas supply lines are cut, Transnistria has become a symbol of the energy crisis. Industries idle, people without heat, and a government battling to keep control. Moldova's prime minister has warned that the country's energy demands may be unfulfilled, potentially leading to a security catastrophe. The EU has been sluggish to supply answers, allowing Moldova to fight for itself. This issue also demonstrates the vulnerability of Europe's smaller countries. While larger EU countries may have the capacity to withstand the storm, smaller states, such as Moldova and Ukraine, remain vulnerable. These regions are frequently at the mercy of larger geopolitical events and energy supply interruptions, and their lack of energy independence leaves them extremely vulnerable to foreign forces. Gas prices in Europe have fluctuated dramatically, causing an economic maelstrom that has left governments scrambling for answers. In December 2024, natural gas prices increased by more than 30% in a single month, indicating significant volatility in the European energy industry. This price volatility is having a significant impact on consumers as well as major organizations. Many European households are already suffering record-high heating expenses, forcing them to choose between energy and essential necessities. Countries such as Italy are on the verge of economic collapse as their governments battle to support soaring energy bills. Gas price limitations have been a source of disagreement in the EU, with some nations advocating for greater ceilings to preserve their own sectors. The entire continent is in a precarious state, and the price of energy will be a critical element in determining whether Europe can bring itself back from the edge. In reaction to the present crisis, the EU is rushing to diversify its energy supply. Countries such as Germany and France are investing extensively in renewable energy, seeking to minimize their reliance on fossil fuels. Solar, wind, and green hydrogen are all considered viable options, but they are far from sufficient to supply Europe's vast energy demands. Furthermore, there is an increasing drive to import more liquefied natural gas, LNG, into Europe. However, the process of constructing new LNG terminals and obtaining extra supplies is sluggish and expensive. Europe is turning to the United States and the Middle East for prospective LNG imports, but transportation and infrastructure remain major challenges. The EU's objective of energy independence may seem lofty, but it is evident that it will take years, if not decades, to realize. Europe's energy crisis is far from finished. While nations struggle to secure stable energy supplies and governments are under increasing pressure to act, one thing is certain: the continent's energy future will look vastly different in the next few years. As alliances alter, markets fluctuate, and political differences expand, Europe must adjust rapidly to avoid additional turmoil. What happens next will have long-term consequences for both the EU's energy sector and the larger geopolitical context. Stay tuned as we continue to watch these events and their implications on the world stage. So what do you think? Will Europe be able to handle this crisis, or is the worst still to come? Leave your opinions in the comments section below, and don't forget to like the video if you found it interesting. Thank you for viewing, and we'll see you in the future video.